There's not an address. It's kind of, there's no house where we found the bodies.
Okay, is there a cross street or anything?
Um, it's in Buckhorn and Yarborough. Yes, it's at the end of Buckhorn and Yarborough Road.
Okay, give me one moment. And what's the telephone number you're calling me from?
The telephone number is my cell phone number.
And what is it?
I'm with the 14. She's a I'm 32. That's what it is.
And where exactly near this location did you find them?
What?
Exactly where are the bodies?
It's there's a power, there's a like a there's an access to, like, where the power company cut a road in,
Mhm.
and they're just laying around on the side of the road.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and notify an officer and have them to come out and speak with you in reference to this.
Is there any need for me to meet the officer there to show them where this is, or do you think they can find it, or?
If you could just remain on scene so they can know where to locate it.
All right, we'll go back to the scene, because we came home. We were on a 4-wheeler, and we were actually putting out deer corn, and we discovered them. Okay. And so we actually came home, and I let my dad know what was going on, and he told me what to do. Okay. So we'll actually go drive back there, and we'll meet the police officers and show them where they are.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
You are.
It was a warm, late summer Friday in Orange County, North Carolina, September 16th, 2022. Just another night in the quiet stretch of countryside between Hillsborough and Mebane. 14-year-old Lyric Woods had spent the evening doing something simple and familiar, getting ice cream with her mom and younger sister. They drove home, settled in, and the night felt ordinary. No one in that house had any sense that life was about to split into a before and an after. Later that night, Lyric told her mom goodnight. She said she was going to take a shower, like she always did, and her mom even teased her not to take an hour and a half, because Lyric was known for long showers. That would be the last time her mother saw her alive. Across the county line in Mebane, 18-year-old Devin Clark was wrapping up his own Friday. Devin was a senior and a football player at Eastern Alamance High School, living with his dad. Like a lot of teenagers on a Friday night, he was talking with friends, making tentative plans, and trying to enjoy the start of the weekend. By all accounts, there was nothing dramatic or unusual about that evening. 2 teens, 2 homes, 2 families who expected to wake up the next morning to ordinary weekend routines. Sometime around 11 p.m., Lyric went into her room. Her stepfather later remembered hearing her start the shower that night, just like she said she would. When he went to bed, he believed she was safe, asleep in the house. But at some point after that, Lyric left. Authorities would later say she probably slipped out through an unlocked back door. A K-9 unit, working backward from where she lived, tracked a scent through the woods behind her home, a path Lyric may have walked many times before. That trail led toward an area where people often rode ATVs and 4-wheelers. Neighbors in that rural area would later tell investigators they saw Lyric on a 4-wheeler in the early morning hours, around 3 a.m. on Saturday. It suggested she wasn't alone. Someone had picked her up. Someone knew she was out there. Meanwhile, Devin was also on the move that night. Phone records and later testimony would show Devin had connections to friends in both Alamance and Orange counties, and that he was in contact with people who could give him a ride. His family expected him to be with friends, maybe staying out late, but still reachable. What no one realized in those hours, in 2 separate homes, in 2 worried but still unsuspecting families, was that both teens were drifting off the grid at the exact same time. On the morning of Saturday, September 17th, Lyric's family woke up expecting a typical weekend. Her mom and younger sister went to rouse her, planning to wake her up around 10 a.m. When they opened her door, Lyric wasn't there. Her bed was empty. The room looked mostly normal. The only thing obviously missing was her iPad. Her family did not see signs that she had packed a bag, planned a runaway, or left a note. It didn't look like a teenager storming out after a fight. It looked like she had just disappeared. Her stepfather and mother were immediately uneasy. They didn't jump to the idea that she had simply run away. This didn't match Lyric's habits or personality. They started checking with friends, calling around, seeing if anyone had heard from her. When the calls and messages turned up nothing, their concern escalated quickly. Around midday, at about noon on Saturday, the family contacted the Orange County Sheriff's Office to report Lyric missing. A formal missing person report was filed, and her information went into the National Crime Information Center that same day. From that moment on, Lyric was no longer just a daughter sleeping in late. She was a missing child. While Lyric's family was sounding the alarm in Orange County, Devin's family in Mebane was starting to feel a different kind of unease. Devin was 18, older, with more independence. At first, his dad and his mom believed he might be out with friends, maybe staying somewhere for the night. But the longer he stayed silent, the more that explanation began to feel thin. His mother would later say publicly that she started to worry when messages went unanswered and Devin didn't come home. This wasn't normal. Devin wasn't the kind of teenager who would vanish without a word. As Saturday turned into Saturday night, and then spilled into the early hours of Sunday morning, the silence began to feel ominous. By Sunday, September 18th, Devin's family realized something was seriously wrong. His father contacted police and formally reported him missing around early afternoon that day. The Mebane Police Department entered him into NCI at 1:42 p.m. on Sunday. His mom took to social media, posting desperate messages and asking anyone who had seen her son to come forward. 2 teens, 2 families, 2 missing person cases in neighboring counties, barely 48 hours after that quiet Friday night. Neither family knew, at that point, how closely those cases were about to intertwine. With a 14-year-old girl and an 18-year-old young man both missing, word spread fast through the local community. Lyric's family and friends shared her photo online, describing her as a 9th grader at Cedar Ridge High School who had vanished overnight with no explanation. Devin's family did the same, posting pictures, describing him as a football player, a senior at Eastern Alamance High, and begging for any information. People in Orange and Alamance counties began watching the back roads and wooded areas more closely. Neighbors started comparing notes about what they had heard that weekend. One man who lived near a wooded trail remembered hearing a burst of gunfire, more than a dozen shots, in the very early hours after midnight. At the time, he hadn't understood what he was hearing. Now, that memory took on a new weight. Meanwhile, investigators were quietly piecing together the early timeline. They knew. Lyric was last definitively seen at home late Friday night around 11 p.m. A canine trail suggested she walked through the woods and was picked up by a vehicle near an ATV area behind her house. Devin had not been heard from since late Friday, and his friends and family could not account for his whereabouts over the weekend. By Sunday afternoon, concern had shifted into something worse, a growing sense that this might not be a case of teenagers accidentally off the grid. Something darker could be going on. On Sunday, September 18th, 2 men went out riding 4-wheelers in a wooded area not far from Lyric's home, near a power line easement and an ATV trail off Buckhorn Road. They were out there for a routine reason, to check trail cameras and ride the paths that locals used all the time. As they made their way along the trail, something caught their attention. Near the edge of the trail, just off the path, they noticed what looked like bodies down a small incline, partially concealed by brush. The scene was unsettling enough that one of them called 911. Dispatchers told them to go back and meet responding deputies, and at about 3 p.m. that Sunday, they led law enforcement to the spot. The deputies who arrived described an overwhelming smell of decay and visible signs that the bodies had been there quite a while, even in just those 36 hours. The area was quickly taped off. Investigators started working the scene carefully, documenting every detail, from shell casings to footprints to tire impressions. At that moment, the families still only knew their children were missing. They had not yet heard what those ATV riders had just found deep in the woods. When deputies reached the ATV trail off the power line easement near Buckhorn Road, the two bodies were clearly beyond help. The 911 caller told dispatch, "We've actually discovered 2 dead bodies," explaining they had been out on four-wheelers putting out deer corn when they stumbled on them. The scene was remote, a rough cut in the land under the power lines, with the bodies lying off to the side of the access path. Investigators could tell immediately they were dealing with teenagers, but positive identification would have to wait on the medical examiner. Family members had been desperately searching and calling all weekend. On Monday, September 19th, relatives confirmed to media that the bodies were 14-year-old Lyric Woods and 18-year-old Devin Clark. Law enforcement had believed as much, but they held back official confirmation until the medical examiner signed off. For Devin's mother, Tiffany Concepcion, the process was agonizing. Her attorney later described how she had not initially been allowed to visually identify her son because of the active investigation. She wanted, in his words, closure, transparency, and the chance to see and confirm for herself that the boy on that trail really was Devin. Detectives and crime scene techs documented everything they could in that power line corridor. There were bodies of 2 teenagers, both showing what appeared to be gunshot wounds, signs of insect activity and smell indicating they had been there quite a while in those late summer conditions, physical evidence that included shell casings and disturbed ground around where they lay. The way the bodies were positioned and where casings were found suggested they had not died where they first met whoever they were with that night. They had been brought there and left. At this early stage, publicly available information stayed limited. The sheriff's office told reporters that both victims appeared to have been shot. Both had been reported missing over the weekend. Investigators were treating it as a homicide and following leads. Behind the scenes, though, they were already tracing a path outward from that cut in the woods, toward phones, vehicles, and the last people known to have seen Lyric and Devin alive. As the medical examiner began work, the Orange County Sheriff's Office started locking in the timeline using 3 pillars. 1. Missing person reports. Lyric's stepfather had reported her missing on Saturday afternoon after realizing she wasn't in her room. She went into the NCIC database around 3:44 p.m. that day. Devin's family reported him missing to Mebane police on Sunday. He was entered into NCIC at about 1:42 p.m. that afternoon. 2. Where the bodies were found. The location was not random. A power line easement and ATV path in western Orange County, not far from where Lyric lived. For locals, it was a known spot for four-wheelers and dirt bikes, exactly the kind of place teens might go late at night, and exactly the kind of place someone might hope bodies would not be quickly discovered. 3. Digital and witness breadcrumbs. Detectives pulled cell phone records for both teens and began looking at call logs and pings around the time they went missing. They also talked to friends and relatives to find out who they had been communicating with on that Friday night into early Saturday. While those details weren't all released publicly at the time, the investigative work moved quickly. Within days, investigators had a rough sense of the window when Lyric and Devin likely died, and a much smaller circle of people who could have been with them. By Tuesday, September 20th to 21st, 2022, the investigation had moved faster than the public updates made it seem. Sheriff Charles Blackwood announced that his investigators had identified a suspect, a 17-year-old, believed to be responsible for the killings of Lyric Woods and Devin Clark. Because of North Carolina juvenile law, the name was not released, but the shift was huge. They were no longer asking who did this, but where is he and how do we bring him in? Inside the sheriff's office, the suspect was no longer just a 17-year-old boy. He was a teenager from Mebane who had recently moved to North Carolina, someone investigators now believed had been with Lyric and Devin in those final hours. Sheriff Charles Blackwood later explained that his team developed this teen as a suspect by processing the crime scene and the surrounding area, collecting forensic evidence and matching it to other information they were gathering. Step by step, they were building a picture that pointed toward one young man, without yet being able to say his name in public. At that point, investigators were focused on two things: confirming that this teenager was actually connected to the scene and figuring out where he had gone. One of the biggest breakthroughs came from tying their suspect to a specific vehicle. Detectives learned that the 17-year-old's mother owned a white GMC Terrain. Surveillance cameras around Buckhorn Road and at a nearby petrol travel center showed a white SUV like that in the area around the time Lyric and Devin were believed to have been killed. There was even an incident at the gas station. The driver struck a concrete barrier, damaging the underside of the vehicle as it pulled in. When the SUV returned home, there was visible damage, and the teen's mother noticed. She was upset enough to tell him he could not stay there, a confrontation that pushed him to find somewhere else to go. Later, investigators would say that a DNA expert found Lyric's blood on the exterior of that same SUV, the vehicle the teenager had been driving that night. For detectives, that turned suspicion into something much more concrete. The car that carried the kids out that night now appeared to be the car that carried their blood. Around the same time, they were watching something else: the suspect's movements. Blackwood has said that, based on the investigation, the 17-year-old left North Carolina late on Sunday evening, the same weekend the bodies were found. He made his way out of state and was eventually located in Delaware, hundreds of miles from that power line trail in Orange County. As they followed the vehicle, investigators also dug into digital data. Phone records and location information showed Lyric, Devin, and the 17-year-old all converging in the same rural area off Buckhorn Road in the early hours of September 17th. After that window, the victims' phones went dark. The suspect's phone, by contrast, continued to move, away from the scene and eventually out of the state. Detectives overlaid this with what they knew from families and friends. Lyric had slipped out after saying goodnight at home in Efland. Devin had been arranging a ride and making plans that night. The 17-year-old had access to his mother's SUV and had been in contact with Devin. Each piece, crime scene evidence, the damaged SUV, the blood, the phone data, tightened the circle around the same teenager. Even after they felt confident in their suspect, Orange County investigators could not simply knock on a door and bring him in. He was out of state and, legally, still a juvenile. They needed help. The sheriff's office worked with the Delaware Violent Crime Safe Streets Task Force, the FBI, and local authorities in Delaware to track the 17-year-old down. Using information from Orange County, where he had been, what he was driving, who he knew, they secured the necessary warrants and set up a plan to arrest him. 18 days after Lyric and Devin were killed, on October 5th, 2022, officers in Delaware took the teenager into custody on the 2 juvenile petitions for first-degree murder. That same day, the Orange County Sheriff's Office announced that the previously unnamed suspect was now in custody in connection with the murders. He was transported back to North Carolina and held in a juvenile detention facility, while prosecutors moved to have his case handled in adult court. For weeks, the community only knew that a 17-year-old boy had been charged. Parents whispered about rumors. Students held vigils and asked when they'd get answers. On November 6, 2022, that changed. At a press conference, the Orange County Sheriff's Office and District Attorney's Office confirmed that the suspect's case had been moved from juvenile court to superior court so he could be tried as an adult. With that shift, they were finally allowed to say his name. The 17-year-old suspect was identified publicly as Isaiah Mackay Ross, a Mebane resident accused of murdering Lyric Woods and Devin Clark the weekend of September 17th to 18th, 2022. Sheriff Blackwood told reporters that, based on the evidence his team had collected, he believed Ross was the person responsible for the deaths of Devin and Lyric. From that point on, the case was no longer about an unnamed teenager. It was about Isaiah Ross and everything that had happened in those early morning hours off Buckhorn Road. By early 2026, Isaiah Mackay Ross was 21 years old and had been in custody for more than 3 years. Prosecutors in Orange County announced that his case would finally be heard in Superior Court in Hillsborough, North Carolina. Ross faced 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of 14-year-old Lyric Woods and 18-year-old Devin Clark. Because the district attorney does not seek the death penalty, a conviction could still mean life in prison without parole. Even though Ross was 17 at the time of the killings, the court had already ruled that he would be tried as an adult. In January 2026, Ross rejected a plea deal. The state had offered to reduce the charges to second-degree murder, with a minimum of 20 to 25 years on each count if he pleaded guilty. Ross said no and did not make a counteroffer, choosing instead to take his chances with a jury. Jury selection began in mid-January. Potential jurors were questioned about pretrial publicity, their views on self-defense, and their ability to judge emotional testimony about 2 dead teenagers. A panel of 12 jurors, plus alternates, was eventually seated, and Superior Court Judge Stephanie Reese gave them strict instructions on how to conduct themselves during the trial. With the jury in place, both sides finally laid out their versions of what happened along Buckhorn Road in the early hours of September 17, 2022. The prosecution told jurors that Ross drove his mother's white GMC Terrain that night, picked up Devin and Lyric, and took them out to the remote ATV trail. He then shot both teens multiple times, including in the back, and left their bodies under the power lines before fleeing the scene and days later, the state. A witness would testify that Ross confessed to killing both Clark and Woods before the bodies were even publicly found. Prosecutors highlighted the nature of the wounds. They said the evidence would show Devin Clark was shot 6 times, including in the back and the back of the head. Lyric Woods was shot 7 times, including a close-range shot to the back of her neck that left gunpowder burns on her skin. To them, this was not a chaotic accident. They called it execution-style violence. The defense, led by attorney Jonathan Trapp, gave a starkly different account. Trapp told jurors that Ross did not even know Lyric before that night. The gun belonged to Devin's father, and Devin was the one who brought it. An argument broke out between Devin and Lyric, and it was Devin, not Ross, who shot Lyric. According to this version, Ross then wrestled the gun away from Devin and shot Devin in self-defense because he was afraid for his life. The defense admitted Ross fired some of the shots, but insisted he was not a murderer. He was a scared teenager trying to survive. One of the most difficult days of the trial came when the Associate Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Lauren Scott, took the stand. Dr. Scott described the injuries in clinical detail. Lyric Woods had 7 gunshot wounds, including a close-range shot to the neck with soot and gunpowder burns on her face, wounds to her back and hand, including her thumb, consistent with trying to shield herself. Devin Clark had 6 gunshot wounds, including shots to his back, his foot, and his rear, injuries that would have caused rapid, fatal blood loss. Families sat in the courtroom listening to these details, some in tears, as photos and diagrams were shown to the jury. The medical examiner's testimony supported the state's claim that both teens were shot as they turned away or were already down, not facing a fair fight. Neighbors near the crime scene also testified. One man told the jury he woke up to a rapid series of loud bangs on the night Lyric and Devin were killed. At the time, he thought it might be fireworks. Now, he believes he was hearing gunfire. His account helped anchor the time of the shootings around the early hours of September 17th. Investigators then walked jurors through the physical evidence. They described arriving at the power line easement and finding the bodies lying off the ATV trail as flies swarmed and shell casings were scattered nearby. In total, 12 spent casings were recovered from the scene. The state tied those casings, and the injuries, to a 9mm handgun that belonged to Devin's father, a Canic pistol that has never been found. Both sides agree this was the suspected murder weapon, but they disagree on who was holding it when Lyric was shot. Prosecutors also presented evidence about the white GMC Terrain. Surveillance video showed the SUV near Buckhorn Road and at the Petro Travel Center on the day of the killings. The vehicle struck a concrete median at the gas station, damaging the undercarriage. Ross's mother later saw that damage and confronted him about it, then told him he could not stay at her house. A DNA expert, according to prosecution summaries, found Lyric's blood on the outside of the SUV, a key link placing her outside the vehicle and tying the car directly to the crime. For the state, the SUV became the thread connecting the remote trail, the teens, and Ross. The defense did not dispute that Ross drove the vehicle. Instead, they framed the damage and the sudden departure from home as the panicked actions of a frightened teenager who had just lived through a deadly confrontation, not the calculated escape of a cold-blooded killer. One of the most crucial witnesses for the prosecution was a man who knew Ross socially in 2022. In court coverage, he is identified as Christian Sykes. Sykes testified that, before the bodies were officially found and identified, Ross told him about a deadly incident involving two people. Ross said there had been a struggle over a gun and that he shot them and dumped their bodies. This testimony is important because it supposedly predates the public discovery of Lyric and Devin's bodies, making it, in the state's view, unlikely that Ross was just repeating rumors. The defense responded by attacking Sykes' credibility. They highlighted that he had only known Ross for a short time and suggested his memory or motives could be questioned. Still, if the jury believes him, his account directly supports the prosecution's claim that Ross himself admitted to shooting both teens. As of today, this case is no longer just a mystery in the woods off Buckhorn Road. It's an active murder trial. We're now in the second week of testimony, with jurors hearing from friends, investigators, forensic experts, and people who say Isaiah Ross described what happened that night in his own words. You've just heard the background, who Lyric and Devin were, how they disappeared, how their bodies were found, and how investigators followed the evidence to a 17-year-old boy named Isaiah Mekhi Ross. What happens next, whether this jury believes this was an execution-style double murder or an act of self-defense, is unfolding in real time in an Orange County courtroom. If you want to see it for yourself, gavel to gavel, go watch the live coverage over on Alex Erickson's channel. She's streaming the Isaiah Ross proceedings and breaking down the testimony as it happens, so you can follow every witness and every ruling as this case moves toward a verdict.